Casey, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me on, man.
Thanks so much for being a part of this, the
course.
first episode of NextPlay.
I'm excited.
The goal of this is really to get entrepreneurs, builders in here, people who are working on things for impact, for purpose, and shining a light on them, and really trying to get people to aspire to build things that matter for the world and to be entrepreneurs. So I want to start by learning a little bit more about you and going to your past. You, at a young age, being an influencer in today's world. A lot of us are familiar with you, right? Your audience, of course, they know about high school Casey, being diagnosed with interspinous ligament damage. Did I say that right?
That's it,
at 15, which ended football at the time.
Yep.
And you were forced to pivot into entrepreneurship. But I want to go deeper into that. What was high school Casey like before the injury?
Yeah, man, that's a great question. And it's so crazy to even think back on that because, that injury was a pivoting point in my life. But, I come from a small town in Richmond, Virginia, right. And growing up, I always played sports. I played hockey for 10 years, and I played lacrosse for 6, then ended up playing football going into high school for about 4 or 5 years. And, high school for me, I grew up in this community where I knew the same people since I was in 5th grade, and when you go to middle school, I still had my same friends, and it was a great ecosystem. I loved my childhood so much. Yeah. But in high school, I really started to notice things because I had 2 older brothers. I love them so much. One's 23, one's 26, and I started to notice what they're doing and the consequences of those actions, whether that was partying or their friends doing drugs or whatever it may be. And
right.
It allowed me to really reflect on what I don't want to do. So going into high school, even before this injury, I really started to be conscious about my decisions because I was trying to set up my future. My goal was to maybe go to college and play lacrosse or whatever it may be.
Okay, wow, so you were the athlete that was going to go and be an athlete.
That was I wanted to go to U of A potentially, play lacrosse, and that was a goal of mine,
Wow.
And I think, my talent was great. I was, I played midfield and attack, very good in lacrosse. And so, that was a goal back then, moving
right.
into high school and outside of middle school.
Right.
And, things just took a turn for the better, of course.
So tell me about you though in high school. Were you the popular kid? Or you were the athlete, or were you?
Yeah.
What group did you fall into?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of I had a great friend group, and I don't like the term just the popular kid,
Yeah.
but the people that may have stuff going on or there's excitement and there's that big crowd of friends that are always doing stuff. I was definitely in a great group, especially 9th grade year.
Yeah.
Sophomore year and then the remainder of high school was completely different. And I say for me, during 7th, middle school, 7th, 8th, and then 9th grade, first year of high school, I look at that as my prime in my childhood, the years
Wow.
that I maximized and really did everything I wanted to do with friends and activities and just having so much fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it was a little bit of popular, but also I was always in my own lane. I came up in a family where my dad always taught the concept of just staying focused and focusing on you, not comparing yourself to others. So I never really fell into this I want to be in another group, or I want to go meet that person because it's the cool kids group. I really was just I had my great friends, and I think we definitely had our, I like to say our cool squad of people that enjoyed what we did, played sports, ride dirt bikes, 4-wheelers, that was our mentality, and it was such a great time for sure.
And I think that's important though to talk about. The reason I ask is because there's this mindset that the entrepreneurs are the people, the outcasts. In school, they were either the nerds, or they were not popular, or maybe they were the other end of that spectrum. So I want to hear, what were your parents like, and what were your siblings like? What was the household that you grew up in that made you who you are?
Yeah, so my parents, my mom, she's been a special ed teacher for the last 8 or 9 years, and my dad, he's worked at a company, Philip Morris, for the past 25 years. So I grew up in this very, modest household, and the biggest thing that I learned from my parents is that they would just do everything in their power to make myself and my brothers happy, whether that was getting us involved in sports and committing to that. But it was definitely hard. The more I mature and grow, I learned about a lot of the hardships that my parents dealt with. My mom, she grew up, she was actually like living in Alaska when she was 2, and she moved all over the country because my grandfather was in the military.
Oh, wow.
And then he worked at Exxon, and it was one of those lives where she was all over the place. She would go to a new school for a year and then switch and then switch. And you know, she ended up meeting my dad in Virginia, and she was living in an apartment, he was living in an apartment, and the rest was history. And you know, they had my brother when she was probably 24, and they were struggling. Like they struggled a lot with not only financially but continuously through my childhood, and I never really realized this looking back, you know. And I always say this in interviews.
They managed to make you feel like you never saw that, right?
Absolutely.
Like
they did the best job at like trying to stay calm, handling things externally where we would never have a clue.
Wow.
But like in reality, like my mom was a babysitter, and she makes 18 grand a year, and she wasn't in the point where like everything she did, like whether that was buying more clothes or going out to dinner, like it was a struggle, you know. And I always tell people, like, I didn't fly on a plane until I paid for the ticket myself, you know, when I was 15, 16 years old, like trying to go to an event or whatever. So like the whole concept of traveling and just flying on an airplane was always a foreign concept. And I would always ask my parents, because I had friends that were always traveling and with their families, and I was like, you know, why aren't we traveling? Why aren't we going to Disneyland? And I still never to this day like been to Disneyland, and that was always something that I thought of. But you know, at the end of the day, they are so loving, the most compassionate and hardworking people. But a lot of those hardships I've learned like through that process, and it means a lot to me just to see how much they've put into our childhood growing up.
I think a lot of young entrepreneurs face of course, face various challenges when they start to reach financial and business success, right?
Yeah.
I was raised being told, I was in a completely different circumstance. I was raised being told that I would never be more successful than my own parents. And it was interesting because I guess most people would take that and they could be really sad about it, but for me it was a driver of like, okay, I want to strive to be more successful than my own parents. Not just financially, but purpose and changing lives.
Yep.
And so it was a big driver for me. And you know, most people have this the other driver, which is that everyone is expected to be more successful than their parents. But I want to hear about that, like the moral weight to do good paired with like social obligation to perform. Looking at someone like you who's amassed a large audience and high degree of success at such a young age, and knowing the story of your parents now, you know, like I have to ask, like from a level of success, my perception is that you are now more successful than your parents. What is that like? Like, is there ever tension? Is there ever strife, or is it greatness? Like they're excited to see that. Yeah,
no, that's a great question, and I totally agree. And I think there's levels to like success and how I view it. You know, like they're completely more successful than me of life and just their journey, right? But maybe financially or opportunity, then I've capitalized on that. And it was an interesting dynamic, like the past 4 or 5 years, you know. I remember like the first time I made more than my mom or my dad in a year, and it was very interesting for me to look at that, right? Like still living at home, I'm 17, 18 years old, in high school, running my first company, and missing 60 days of school, traveling back and forth to LA or New York, doing these interviews. And for me, I always, and my mom told me this since day one, like once she really saw me get this entrepreneurial bug, she would always tell me like, stay true to your roots. Like, don't change, not in a bad way, but like, don't let outside circumstances change you for the worse. And like, she was always cautious about like who I was talking to and what I was doing, because I always tell people like one of the hardest things for me to do was selling my parents on letting me travel by myself, you know, because they grew up still, like they're coming into town this Monday.
At what age was that?
16. I'm moving into 17. Like they never traveled outside of their honeymoon, and they've been married for 30 years. So when I started getting these like opportunities continuously to, whether that's come out to LA or do this interview or come to this event, it really started to like get them thinking about like, wow, like we have 2 older sons, one's in community college, one's still in high school, and one's, you know, the sophomore in high school. Like it was just a foreign lane to them. Like their whole not expectation, but it's like I grew up, I graduated with a 4.0 GPA. I was very like serious about my school. I took AP classes. Even when I was doing all this stuff, like I was managing my schoolwork, and that was always a discipline my parents said. She's like, you know, you're not traveling unless you get a good grade on the test or whatever it is. And I grew up in that type of mentality, but I know I didn't I did not want to go to college, but I was so passionate about other projects.
Yeah.
And once they saw that and felt that, and through my consistency, they were completely invested and completely in love with me doing what makes me happy. And like I have all the love towards them for allowing me, because I think, you know, a lot of friends of mine, like as soon as you veer off and do something different, like you may face adversity and people that are telling you that's not right or why are you doing that. And I definitely felt that a little bit, but it was through actions and consistency where they bought in. They bought in on what I was doing and completely fell in love with it, because like it was this whole new world, right? I remember the first time I interviewed my friend now, Drama from Young and Reckless, this clothing brand, and like my mom and I, we grew up sitting on the couch watching Robin Big and Rob Dyrdek's Fantasy Factory. Like this was like my mom's favorite show, and I remember like one time when I interviewed Drama, like I FaceTimed my mom when I was with him, and it really just made her so happy. And same thing with my dad. Like he saw that I was very passionate about what I was doing, and you know, for context, like my dad grew up in a very challenging household. He was one of 7 kids. His dad died when he was like 14. He started working religiously from 13, 14 years old, trying to provide for his siblings. And like he's, I would say, like the only sibling that really moved out of his hometown of Tennessee that has now a, what I deem like highly successful life in a sense. And just seeing that, it makes me more grateful to be able to do what I'm able to do. And I think he notices that and like wanted me to continue that. And he's always been super supportive.
What was the flip though for you, going from being this athlete that was on the trajectory to go to college, become an athlete, to then becoming the entrepreneur, going into podcasting even?
Yeah. So I mean, for me, like growing up, I was always, I'd say, a hustler, right? Like when it snowed in Virginia, I was the one that would knock on doors and shovel driveways. Or when, if I wanted to make some extra money, I bought a lawnmower and I would mow grass, or whatever it may be. And I always had this like mentality of like, hey, like nothing's gonna come to me. I have to go get it myself. But I never really knew what I wanted to do after high school. And I think a lot of young people face this. It's like, what do I want to do? What does my life look like? And, you know, as I was moving into high school, you know, playing sports, like I had zero intention to not go to college, right? And it was, you know, you brought it up at the beginning, this whole neck injury. So it was the first day of hitting practice in football. You know, first day you put on your pads, you put on your helmet, you're going down to the field to get ready for the season, games in a couple weeks. And I'm doing this drill with another guy on the team. It's where you pretty much just, you know, as soon as the whistle blows, you go at it. You take the other guy to the ground. And I was taking this guy to the ground, and he ended up like spinning me, and my helmet sort of came off my head a little bit because the chin strap was too loose. And then I slammed my head on the ground, and the doctor said my helmet guillotined my spine in a sense. And it wasn't one of those injuries that was like instantaneous rush to the hospital, but I knew something was wrong. And to your point, I woke up the next day, I go to the doctor because I literally couldn't move my head in any direction, and get some x-rays. I'm sitting in the room with my mom, and the doctor walks in and says, I have some good news and I have some bad news. The good news is you're not paralyzed and you can walk and you're good. The bad news is you have to be in a neck brace for the next 6 months, and you probably can never play football again in your life.
Oh, wow.
And just said it like that, straight up, which I respect. But at the time, I was so in denial, you know? I was like, oh, my neck hurts, but this isn't it. But looking back, like that was it. That was the last day I was on the field. That was the last time I was able to play football. And in that moment, there was a massive pivot, right? And it was a mindset shift of now I had more time. And I say that because, you know, I'm getting home from school. Instead of going to practice for 3 hours, I'm sitting in my room. And that started to compound, and I started to get depressed and angry at the world.
So you did have this moment. You did have this anger for the world, this like frustration.
Yeah, and that was probably like a good 1, 2, 3 months initially of like, I was pissed off. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was getting mad at my parents for no reason. And it was me just having this time where I started to change my habits, right? I started to go on social media more. I started to watch more YouTube videos. And early on, I started to just come across these different entrepreneurs online, people that I started following, you know, one of them being Ty Lopez or Gary Vaynerchuk, or I could go on and on, Tony Robbins. And something just clicked for me. I was like, I like what these guys are saying. You know, they're talking
Yeah.
about the good life, health, wealth, love, and happiness, and finding your purpose, and
Yeah.
just talking about success, not only financially, but spiritually and emotionally, and in a
Yeah.
family environment. And like, I didn't really grow up with mentors in a sense, like outside of my parents, like guiding me in life.
Yeah.
I never really had a like career mentor or someone that I would talk to about my longevity and purpose and passions. I was just doing me. So as soon as I had this switch, I just started going down this rabbit hole that we can get into. But it was that transition of, you know, having that neck injury to 3, 4, 5 months down the road of just finally finding something that I am attaching with. And I like to tell people, like, I lost my identity at the time. I couldn't play football anymore. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And, you know, I heavily believe, like, everyone has an identity of themselves, and you want to relate to things. You want to feel accepted, right?
Yeah.
Whether that's with sports or with a game or an activity. And for me, I feel like I just latched onto this entrepreneurial, like, business bug, learning about companies, learning about fundraising, learning about marketing, advertising, Facebook ads, this whole world. And I became obsessed.
You brought up this point of staying true to your roots earlier on, and I want to touch on that a little bit. So everyone changes as we grow up, right? We all like evolve. I thought I was going to spend my entire life working in agriculture. I used to raise chickens in high school, and I thought that I would go on to work in the agriculture industry, focus on making it more sustainable and all this. But what ended up happening was I raised chickens, I sold the eggs, started writing articles about it, I pitched it to publications, and then one got picked up, it was the Huffington Post, and then later on I went to go and make a publication. And it's interesting because I now have nothing to do with agriculture. And I sometimes wonder, not as a regret, but like a what if, like did I not stay true to what I wanted to do? Like did I not fulfill that vision that I had as a young person, and did I skip that because I got lost along the way? So I'm curious, do you ever have that moment of like, did younger Casey stay true to his roots? Did younger Casey, would younger Casey still be proud of where he's at today?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think 100% I've stayed true to my roots, but I always wonder, like, if that neck injury didn't happen, where would I be? If that neck brace, if I didn't have to wear that neck brace, who would I be? What would my story be, right? Because that is what I identify with, right? Like when I tell my story, when I tell how I got to where I am, it's that moment. And I think a lot of people have that moment where either things change or you can reflect on it and it was a pivoting point in your life. And I do think about that all the time, like whether I see if I see a lacrosse game on TV or if I'm watching sports, I'm like, wow, like if I was to continue playing football and doing all this stuff that I was passionate about back then, like where would I be? And I love the unknown answer because I truthfully have no idea. But I am truthfully, and I say this with pure confidence, like so fulfilled with how things have turned and where my life is today, not only from a like business and success standpoint, but I believe like my family and where I come from, everything that I do is completely foreign to them. And I feel as if I have opened them up to a completely new world where whether that's with, you know, having that abundance mindset or striving for more, where you know like both of my. Do
you feel like you've brought them along on this journey with you? Like you said, your siblings, right? Like, do they also have the same mindset? Have they adopted what you have learned throughout time, and they're joining you on this entrepreneurial journey?
I would say yes, like absolutely, in their own way, not to the extent in which I have. Like my older brother, he's a realtor now, and like 3 years ago, I was doing an event out in Seattle. It was like this snowboard mastermind. We had a bunch of like high-level entrepreneurs fly in, and he came out and he got this real estate bug, and that was his first time coming out to Seattle or coming out to the West Coast, and he fell in love with real estate, and now he's been crushing it the past 6 months, and it was a process of like 2-3 years, and he always, you know, we talk all the time, and I always update him with what I have going on, and he always tells me like thank you, and I think for my older brothers, I always feel like the younger older brother, right? Because I may be more farther along in life or career-wise, but like I still learn so much from them as much as they learn from me, right? Like my older brother had a kid when he was 21. I have a 5-year-old niece, and I'm an uncle now. So like I learned so much from that journey and that experience about where I want to be in the future and what that looks like. But they've definitely followed me along that journey. And sometimes I feel like it may be disconnected, right? Like I moved right to Arizona when I was 18, right out of high school, and I was living with a bunch of my friends, and I remember like my parents came out and visited me once out there, but I've lived in like 4 different apartments and houses, and now I live in LA, and my parents are coming this weekend, where they haven't really like seen that whole journey and process. So sometimes I do feel like there is a massive disconnection, and trying to keep them up to speed on like how fast I'm moving or what I'm doing is hard, because they just come from a completely different world. But they love it, and they love to see like the journey and the process.
We'll talk about NFTs in a minute, but it's funny that you say that it's hard for them to keep up sometimes, because like I feel like I can't even keep up anymore with NFTs and crypto and where that's going. But before we get to that, I wanted to ask, what would you have changed anything if you could go back? Like if you could go back and do something differently, or would you have gone to college, or was there any of those things that you feel that you could have done differently or should have done differently?
I mean, I feel like I love the way my journey has played out, and I don't regret anything. But I mean, when I think about like if I was to change anything, I always ask myself, and this is something that I'm inspired by one of my buddies. They have this company, Super Coffee. Like it's 3 brothers that they all work together on one company. They have the same visions, and I always think to myself like, wow, like could my brothers and I go start a company together? Like, why didn't that happen, right? Because sometimes I do feel like this lone wolf doing my things. I'm talking about what I'm doing with them, and I can absolutely bring them opportunities, but that is something I'm like, wow, like when I was living at home in high school, like how could I have gotten my brothers involved more, you know? Not that I was like being selfish in a sense, but just thinking differently about it. I do think about that a lot, and it isn't something that I would like to have changed, and I still think there's an opportunity there. But
you're young.
I think about that
so
a lot.
much time.
I'm like, wow, like my brothers and I need to do something together, whether that's real estate or whatever it may be. But because they're so passionate about life in the world and want to continue to grow. So that is one thing for sure.
So I want to talk about like the branding point of being an entrepreneur. It's always one of the most challenging things, I think, when people ask like, what do you do? And we're so young too that it's always someone older asking like, what do you do? I always feel like a prick when I say like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur. But then when it's the other end of it and I explain what I actually do, there's this sense of comparison sometimes people have, where they compare their life to your own, and they end up feeling like worse about themselves sometimes, which you don't want to ever make people feel. So I want to ask you, like, what's the hardest part for you about making it while being young?
That's a good question. I mean, I think, and I love that question. You know, whenever someone asks, "What do you do?" Like, you know, everyone has like what they do day to day, the company or the brand. But you know, if I'm being transparent, like I'm figuring out every single day, and I think I've learned that from many people that I've interviewed as well. Like, everyone's figuring it out, you know, and everyone gets to a certain place along their journey in a different way. But I would say like trying to not keep up with your peers. Like, I don't like the comparison. I think there's a positive way to compare and to emulate and see what someone else is doing. But I do feel as if sometimes you fall into that, or I fall into that comparison, right? It's like, why am I not here? What are they doing that I'm not? What do they know that I'm not? And it all comes from a place of like, I want to learn more and ambition. But I think that's something that I face, you know, often, is like maybe deep down I say I don't compare myself, but maybe I do. And you know, sometimes like over the last 2-3 years I've done so many different things, and I'm like, wow, like I've learned so much through the process. Was I maybe not focused enough because I jumped to a different couple things, or were they all lessons? And I believe that was the case. But I think as I grow and change, so does my identity. Same thing that I talked about earlier, right? Like I think it's definitely the journey, and something that I'm in love with overall.
So that journey is really important, because like we said, we change consistently, we're growing and changing all the time. But when you have an audience, you're growing and changing in front of the public eye. People are watching you at all times. So I want to talk about like hate for a minute, right? Gary Vee is famous for this line of like, he has empathy for the haters because they must be having it so bad in their own lives if they're going to go and try to pull other people down. I love that mindset, and knowing how positive you are. I want to hear a story from you about an instance of how you dealt with hate. Like the one story that has stayed in your mind that, you know, it's not keeping you up at night, but it's that like, I will never forget that moment that happened.
I mean, I think sometimes, not necessarily hate. I feel like I don't receive a lot of
Okay.
hate on social media.
Okay.
But I've gotten a lot where people reach out to me, right, and they see me interviewing a lot of these great people, you know, the Larry Kings and Robert Greene and all these people. And sometimes people will come to me, and I've gotten a couple of DMs about this, and they stick out to me, where it's like, the only reason you have these people on your show is they want to leverage your audience, or like they don't care about you. They just want to like, you know, build their business and suck the energy from your platform or whatever it is. And like people hating on like my ability to get people on my show, and that I'm maybe leveraging them or whatever it may be. And I definitely align with Gary. Like whenever I receive a hateful message, I try to go out of my way and send them like a thorough video back or a voice message, like addressing what they said, and not being.
So you respond to all of them.
For sure, not being aggressive back, but coming from a place of understanding and letting them know like my intentions, because I feel like if you know someone's intentions, even though there may be misconceptions of what the reality is, I think understanding someone's intentions and why they do what they do and how they do it is important. And I think that's definitely something I've noticed, but I wouldn't say it's hate, but maybe people feel as if like, oh, why does he get to interview these people? Like maybe podcasters or younger people that are coming up, right? But I mean, to be truthful, I don't receive a lot of hate messages on social media at all.
Those people that you do respond to, do you find that they respond positively to you? Like they like it, or do they keep fighting and they're just trying to get you? I
would say like 90% of people flip. Okay. And they see my point and apologize sometimes.
Wow.
Like truthfully, I've had that happen like many times, and it's you know, if they hit me up again and I'll respond, and they'll say they like the podcast, or if they come from a place where I feel like they're angry, I'll send them an interview that I did to say, hey man, like I know you're coming from a place of anger, hate, or whatever, but in this interview I talked about with this highly skilled person about these things that you may be going through. Not that I'm trying to say that you are, but I always try to provide resources and feedback. But
that's great.
At the end of the day, like I don't receive that much hate on social.
So let's talk about that positivity for a moment. So 2020 was, of course, a really challenging year for pretty much everyone on the planet, given COVID, but especially for Americans, because it was an election year and we started to unpack conversations about race again and how we should and can all be doing better. I do my utmost to be as positive as possible, especially on social media. I don't want to ever be that person that's putting out bad energy and negative energy or sadness into the world. But I'm curious if you ever feel or get called out for being out of touch as an influencer. Like,
yeah, I mean, I definitely do. And I think for like my social media in particular, and like the way I've always thought about it is like, I've always told myself, I never want to be the biggest influencer or someone that's famous. Like my goal on social is to, you know, I've sort of fallen in love with this concept of like, I identify with my podcast and these interviews because it builds my brand, it gets me connected with people, and I have an intention there. But I do agree, you know, sometimes I'll follow people as well from the reverse, and you're like, wow, their life is perfect, and everything's great, and sometimes I'm like, wow, like, and I truthfully believe, you know, you see all the great things on social media. Like some people that are truly vulnerable will vent and tell you about the dirty, nasty, like hardships in their life, which I love and respect. And when someone does that, like it's amazing, but it is hard for a lot of people to do that because you may feel like you're being judged or you want to keep your private life private. So for me, coming from a place of positivity, similar to you, I always try to, you know, whether that's share a quote of my story that I like, or maybe share a book that I'm reading, or all my interviews are purpose-driven, impact-driven, education-driven. You know, I try to keep the conversations about business and life and advice. And
as someone who's built a business around encouraging young people to take setbacks and to retune those difficulties into success, into profits, how do you think young entrepreneurs should approach the challenges we've been facing the last year and in this year to come?
Yeah, I mean, you know, my podcast is Rise of the Young, and my whole goal with it is to empower young people and bring a lens from someone that is young, right? And having conversations with these people. And I would say, like, whenever I talk to someone young, and, you know, I'm young, you're young, we're so young in the grand scheme of things, but my 16-year-old self or 15-year-old self is a completely different person than who I am today. And, like, more recently, I spoke to this 7th grade class. One of my cousin actually, his class was doing a project on entrepreneurship, and it's a bunch of 12 and 13-year-olds that, you know, they follow the Jake and Logan Pauls, and they know about NFTs because they follow them, and they're exposed to so much information. And like when I was even speaking to them, or when someone that's my age or younger like contacts me on social media, I think the biggest thing that I've learned is just you have to surround yourself with great people, and you have to be very careful with the advice you take. There's so much power in today's world with social media, and you hear all the negative things, but there's so much positive, and there's so many great people you can meet. And I remember actually, it's a funny story, like being in school, it was like 10th, 11th grade year, and when, you know, I'm already in this lane of entrepreneurship, and the teacher or there's the presentation about like all the negative sides of social media, and it was like all dictated towards negativity, and there's definitely a place, and there's a lot of bad people out there, but it was strictly about why you shouldn't use social media as much, and why you shouldn't post things, and why you shouldn't connect with people online. And I remember like raising my hand and like coming from a place of optimism and positivity, and telling my story, trying to be this like reference point. And like the teacher ended up agreeing with me, and having like a sense of like, wow, like that makes sense. Like this probably isn't the best thing to be preaching if there's someone that's sitting in here that has done the complete opposite and has created opportunity. So
I love how the teacher ended up agreeing with you, because I feel like so many teachers would take that and just be like, no, shut up, kid. Like I'm the one in charge here. But let's talk about NFTs.
Let's go.
So non-fungible tokens, which is the acronym, or the long form for NFTs. They're blowing up, especially in the art market. I was, of course, following along when you did your drop with Television on Super Rare, right? So let's talk about it. First of all, I'm still a skeptic. You know, to me, it's just a modern evolution of sports cards trading. So I need the elevator pitch. Like, how do NFTs become integrated into day-to-day life in the way that I feel sports cards haven't?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and before we get into this deep subject, I'm no expert and the guy that knows everything in this space at all. I just want to make that clear. But I'm super excited about it, and I've learned a lot over the last couple of months.
But you do know a lot, because like it's funny because we're like a year difference in age. But I feel like I'm old when it comes to this. Like I see people on Twitter and everywhere else talking about crypto and NFTs, and I'm so far out of the loop. Like I can't even understand some sentences of this. Like, so I mean, it's a new world.
NFTs, you said like non-fungible token, and for people that may not know what that means, like an NFT in a nutshell is if you have a dollar bill, you have a dollar bill, and I have a dollar bill, and we exchange it, we both have an equal value, and that is a fungible token, or something that is fungible. A non-fungible token, NFT, is if you have something and I have something, and they're not you cannot exchange it for an equal value. One is worth more, one is rare, one is exclusive, and that's my like known factor on that. So like Blau, one of the biggest NFT artists, he actually has been in this space for like 2 or 3 years, and he's actually done this on a small scale, where if someone comes to an event, right, and there's only 1,000 tickets available, and just that's it, you can drop an NFT, let's say on a 1 of 1,000, where if it sells out, that's it, the tickets are sold, and you get sent a proof of ownership of that ticket on the blockchain, and then you know, like a normal event, or if you go to a music festival, you get the email confirmation, either they send you the passes or whatever, and like you show that at the gate. So in an event world, if there's a 1 of 1,000 NFT for an event, someone buys it and it sells out in 5 minutes, just like an actual concert would, you can show that proof of ownership on the blockchain, which is, you know, already a thing on Ticketmaster, and you can just sell out. But it's just a cool concept where you can have that ticket in your wallet. You can showcase it in 5-10 years, right? If you want to showcase that you went to Coachella in 2018, you can have that sort of like rookie card mentality, but you can showcase it, proof on the blockchain in your wallet. And that's just one use case. And you know,
could
these
you
are
turn
things.
around and sell that then though for a different value?
I don't know the exact answer to that, but like for a ticket in a sense, I would assume that if it's sold out,
Yeah.
they sold it for $100 each or whatever,
Yeah.
and someone else wanted to buy it from you,
I see what you're
I
saying,
think
prior
you
to the
could
event.
sell it to somebody
Yeah.
prior to that event. And
Okay.
these are all different things that people are trying to figure out, especially with exchanges and platforms
Yeah.
that are listing this art.
Should we be pushing young people, like future entrepreneurs, to be focusing on NFTs?
I mean, I think it's something that isn't going away.
Yeah.
I mean, I believe in crypto as an asset. I believe in NFTs as a
Sure.
form of transaction and proof of ownership.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I tell people that ask me questions about the space, I say, hey, like, this isn't going away. This is just the infancy of NFTs.
Yeah.
And people are learning every day, and people are putting a lot of resources. And even, I put together this NFT drop with this World Star brand, and the COO Danny, he's a good friend of mine, and like their whole business model of like they're a media giant, one of the most
Right.
like highest engaged social media brands on Instagram, and they are really focusing on this space from a music perspective, like how can artists tap into it, not only from an art angle,
Yeah.
but from a, hey, drop an album, can you drop a single, can you do exclusive content?
Do you think that there's a way that NFTs can be used for impact, for good? Because like traditionally, right, artists are a group of people who don't make the most amount of money normally,
Yeah.
right? Like they're always struggling to break and reach audiences. Do you think NFTs can be used for them in a new and more impactful way?
Totally. And I think like the artist, as in like a digital artist or even a photographer or a painter,
Yeah.
like it's bringing the most value to that world where, you hear that term like a struggling artist so
Right.
much, and the artist makes the most money after they die, right?
Yeah.
Like that whole concept is real. And like one of my buddies, Justin, he's a photographer, and this is actually a cool story. And I think this has so much purpose and impact, and it's life-changing in a sense, not only financially, but what's possible. So
Yeah.
this guy, Justin, a good friend of mine, lives in LA. He sort of also got me hip to NFTs, and the last 3 years, he's traveled all over the world taking pictures of twins, because this whole story was, at birth, he was born with a twin, his twin passed away, and he has this like, strong emotional attachment to twins. So he traveled the last 3 years building up a portfolio of 100 twins. And he was trying to sell this like framed picture of 100 twins in one set.
Yeah.
And he's been trying to list it, and not that many people have been interested in galleries. They're like, it's not our thing.
Yeah.
He decided to drop a one-of-one NFTs for every single piece, so 100 NFTs. And he told this story in a blog post and on social, and like vented about his story and the process to do this, and how he was struggling to make it as an artist for the past 3 to 5 years, but this is his life's purpose and mission. And within 7 days, he sold out.
Wow.
And it was not just people that wanted to buy the art, but it was real collectors and
Right.
people that believed in the story. And the best part about all of this is, with an NFT, since he is the original owner, like the resale market is incredible, because an NFT owner can attach a 5-10% I would say commission on resales and retain ownership and receive compensation. And I know this isn't about the money, but I believe in this a lot, because it puts the power back into the artist's hands.
Let's talk about podcasts. When I was younger, podcasts were lame. It was something older people would listen to and that I had no interest in, and I think a lot of us didn't really understand back then. But now they've been becoming so much more interesting. They've become so much more integrated into our culture and the way we consume content. How do you feel the podcast game has been changing in the last couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I've had my podcast for 3.5 years now. It'll be 4 years in December. So it's like, I'm still super new to this, right? Like, we see someone like Joe Rogan who's been at it for 12 years. But, podcasting to me really came up on my radar by accident. I read a book by Gary Vaynerchuk, Crushing It. And I remember it was the last chapter. It was all about podcasting. And, the whole book's about social media and the future of it and what he thinks about it.
Yeah.
And he's always great at predicting things. That's what I've noticed from Gary. And the last chapter, he talked about podcasting, not necessarily as just a form of content, but how you can leverage it across your business. And he talked about building relationships, creating deal flow from it, and really making it a platform to have conversations with people that you want to talk with. Because this whole concept of like taking somebody's time and sitting down for coffee and asking to pick someone's brain. Like there's so much of it out there, and a lot of people can't do it, especially people that are busy like yourself and people that I've interviewed, where having a podcast nowadays, or when I was reading about it, was not only an excuse to have a great conversation, but it's a different form of content. And I was someone that loved watching long interviews. I loved long form movies. And you go on TikTok or Instagram and it's just a quick scroll, quick dopamine rush. And I was like, I want to create content that's meaningful, that's impactful. I want to learn something from people that I want to get in touch with. And overall, at the time when I started it, I wanted to build my network and meet great people. So it was the end of 2017. I was reading that book and I just decided to go for it. I had no real long-term vision for the podcast. I remember my first episode, I popped in a pair of my Apple headphones with the ones with the cords, and I had this little microphone. I didn't have a microphone at the time. And I recorded my first 5-minute episode and was off to the races. And the first person I interviewed was a good friend of mine, Caleb Maddox. And then I interviewed Kieran and my buddy Jeff. And I was just reaching out to people in my close circle and people that I knew. I had no intentions of interviewing celebrities or like top CEOs. But as soon as I felt that fire and my passion for conversation, where every single conversation I would walk away from smarter, excited, and it lit me up inside, I really set a goal out. I said, hey, I want to interview 60 people in the next 90 days, right? So I just set out on this mission to move quick, and that was my goal, and I think looking back, I wasn't necessarily focused on the most quality, right? This was Zoom interviews and doing it scrappy, Facebook Lives, and I was just making it happen, but it really taught me everything that I know now about podcasting. And I think overall, on a different note, like the podcast vertical and industry year over year has been doubling, if not tripling, in the last 3 to 4. And there's so many more podcasts coming out there right now where it's now all about quality and distribution. I think more recently I've noticed so many people listen to podcasts. I think half of like the male adults and female as well in the US all listen to podcasts. Don't quote me on that. But it's just an exciting space to be in, and it's exciting from a software angle. Like I have a cool project that I've been working on that I want to help the podcast world out with.
What's the one piece of advice you'd give then to a young person who's going to start a podcast? Is it quantity, just like make podcasts, say I'm going to commit to 60 a month or whatever, 60 in a year and just make as many as possible? Or is it to go the quality route and try to, make a small amount and make them really unique and really special and put them out one at a time?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much value in both. I think the quality route, like something that I think about a lot more now, like even coming to this set, I'm inspired by you, and I'm thinking about like what can I do differently. Well, I mean, I think nowadays quality matters more than anything because there's so much noise out there with podcasts and interviews and all this type of stuff. Like the thing for me, there's been a lot of people that I've interviewed that have been interviewed hundreds of times, right? So like what makes it valuable? What makes it different? And for me, it may be, I'm young, or it may be I ask different questions and people like that. But I think the quality angle is very important, and having that like real long-term approach to it. Like even me right now, thinking about the next 1 to 5 years of my podcast, I have a lot of different ideas of how I can bring more quality to it or have different types of shows for different people. So I think my biggest piece of advice for someone that wants to start a podcast is just start. I have so many people that have come to me for advice, and that's probably the most brought up topic on my social media and the DMs is like people asking me about podcasting and how to book a guest and how to start a show and how I got that guest on and all that type of stuff. And I think the biggest thing is don't overthink it. Have a show idea, come up with a great title and concept, and start and figure it out. I remember when you first talked about NextPlay in this show, like you're making it happen and you're doing what it takes to get the ball rolling. And
I think everyone probably looks at podcasting or just content creation as possibly a dream job, right? You get to just get on, be yourself, ask questions, talk to great people. But every dream job comes with its nightmare tasks. What is the worst thing about podcasting, in your opinion?
That's good. I think the best part is actually doing it and
Yeah.
the conversation.
Yeah.
I think the not terrifying, but the work is in the creating the back end content, getting it uploading,
Right.
not only putting it out there, but wanting it to do so good and maybe it doesn't,
Yeah.
right? Like I think that's always the thing for a content creator, which is, you want something to do so well or get picked up by somebody,
Yeah.
and it just doesn't. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'll have interviews that get 100 views. Sometimes I have something on YouTube to get 200,000, right? And I think it's balancing and trying to like stay aligned with like not
Yeah.
everything you post is going to get listeners, or an abundance of listeners.
Yeah.
But I would say there's not too much downside to me,
Okay.
because like, I feel like I would be way more stressed out about podcasting and maybe not like it if it was a must do in my life. Like
I
for
see.
me, some weeks I do 0 interviews. Some
Yeah.
weeks, like when this NFT craze started happening, I did like 5 in a week. I did Monday through Friday, an
Wow.
interview a day, because there's so many people I want to talk to.
Yeah.
And for me, that's what's interesting and fun and
Yeah.
keeps it like top of mind, because I know if I don't feel like interviewing people, which sometimes I don't want to take a couple hours throughout the week and sit down on Zoom and do an interview. Sometimes I'm not feeling it.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, sometimes I'm aggressive and go all in
Yeah.
and do 5 to 10 in a week.
I love it. Well, I want to hear. So you have a million things going on, as most entrepreneurs do. But like you've written the book Rise of the Young, you have the podcast Rise of the Young. You have this new NFT you've just put out. What else are you working on?
Yeah, I mean, the big project right now, my company is called Media Kits. My best friend, Kieran, who you know so well,
Yes.
we came up with this concept, and he sat on the idea for like 2 years, but not until like 8 months ago, we really started building out the tech. And overall, what it is MediaKits.com is a real-time data analytics companies for musicians, bloggers, influencers, podcasters, to create a media kit with real-time data and analytics that never gets outdated.
I love it. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. For anyone who wants to find Casey, where can we find you?
Yeah, the best place to follow me is Instagram, is just @Casey, and then the podcast is Rise of the Young. You can find it anywhere,
Yeah.
iTunes, Spotify, and all the other places you can find podcasts.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's probably the 2 best places to find me.
Thanks so much for being here.
Of course, thank you so
Appreciate
much, Milan.